Howdy, folks. Today is the May 5th OpenJS Security Collab Space meeting. So today, one of the main agenda items is a little bit different than stuff we have talked about in the past and is a totally new topic, unless you've been paying attention in GitHub on issues that have come up in the CPC repo, I believe. And that is regarding um, OpenJS projects reporting or documenting the business relationships and tools that they're using um, for the foundation itself. Um, Ben, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, I think in your own words, hearing a little bit about what you'd like to see out of this and the objective of it would be a great way to kick off.
Yeah, and I just dropped a link to the issue where some of this discussion has happened. It's in the CPC repo. It's 1425. So, yeah, a little background on this one. As part of the Sovereign Tech Fund work, the IT team did an audit or an intake of most of our OpenJS projects where they documented what I would call like non-trivial services. So things that are used for like Cloudflare, DNS, CI providers, things like that. So that was like a moment in time audit where the IT team reached out to projects individually and collected this information. And so that was really valuable. But because the IT team performed this and owned it, it meant that the projects didn't really have a way of maintaining it themselves or providing this information. And so the audit that we did became rapidly out of date. And so I was noodling with, well, what if we had the projects maintain some minimal documentation on some of these third-party services? The idea is that it would help us understand what services we might want to have a more formal relationship with, what services maybe we want to get as an official partner. So, for example, if a bunch of folks are using Datadog, maybe we want to approach them and say, hey, can we get something a little bit more concrete? Or maybe we can offer this to our projects. In terms of like what information I was thinking would be valuable for the projects to collect, it would really be, I think, the name of the service provider and essentially what they're using it for. I did not want to collect anything else that would be a security concern, right? So, not email address, not anything below that altitude I just described. In my head, this wouldn't be super controversial because a lot of this information is already public. So, for example, like Node lists out their service providers and the people that help them with hosting and things like that. And so I created this issue, and there was some discussion in there. I think it's kind of a mixed bag. Like some folks were like, "Yes, this is a good idea." Some folks were like, maybe not so much." Um, there's a specific project that said, "Hey, we do this already, but we keep it private." So in the CPC call, we basically said, well, since some of these concerns are security related, let's take this to the security working group and see if those folks have a recommendation or at least some insight that we could provide back to the CPC. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Ben. I read through the comments in the issue itself, and after your nice discussion, thinking about it a little bit, and I am wondering whether or not there is, um, and this is not very open sourcey and GitHub friendly, I guess, but um, maybe a possible way to manage the risks around this, or concerns around this, is to have the information separately in like a Google Sheet that maintainers can keep rather than keeping it in some repo, but so it's private. But I know that introduces other kinds of silly problems as well.
Yeah,
So
I think so. When I was originally imagining this, it was a file that would be in the root of the project's repo, so public, and that way, not only would it be visible, but also it would be easily updatable by project. It's sort of where the
Hmm.
code lives already. Um, I totally that's sort of like what I was thinking. But I understand that a lot of the concerns that people have with doing that. I am not speaking in Spanish. Zoom. Why do you think I'm speaking in Spanish?
I get
Sebastian
that.
turned it on.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I've had that happen too. I'm so glad I'm not a
Huh.
crazy person.
Yeah. Maybe it's my accent. I don't know. So anyway, I don't hold that view tightly, so I'm very open to other ideas.
Yeah.
Robin, you had your hand up.
Yeah. Um, I like having it published for the transparency. When we started this exercise, I called it an archaeological dig, going back 15 to 18 years, trying to figure out who had handshake deals with who, was it actually a current service? So having it sort of be transparent makes it, I think, easier to manage and maintain out in the open. Um, so as services come and go, I think that would be quite helpful. I think some of the debate was, well, it's pretty obvious already, and some folks thought it would make those services a target. So that's where I think we need your council group.
And thanks, Robin. Ulysses?
Yeah, I think it's a very good exercise to have this information publicly. Also, most of the time, the amount of risk is like really low. Like for example, and this already most of that is known information. Like for example, if someone is, I don't know, using Sentry for error tracking, it's like okay, we can see that someone will mention that on issues or whatever. So yeah, it's going to be there. Just to show a case, for example, in the case of Node.js, we have like most of the code that we use for the infrastructure, like publicly available, including, for example, the Ansible inventory, with list all the machines that we have and the names and so on. And so far has been super useful. I mean, yeah, you can think this as a treat model as well in terms of, yeah, I have a lot of IPs listed in one place. So, yeah, that's totally fine, but you can find those as well on issues or just figuring out, going to CDNS and resolving and so on. So for us, so far has been a really nice experience having this information public, because helping a lot of collaborators to understand what's going on with machines and help us also to understand how to, understand all the hundreds of machines that we have. So it has been public for years. It has been useful for us. I think this is even much more sensitive in terms of possible information outside than, just listing services. Actually, doing the exercise of listing the services that I did on the time for Node.js was a really nice experience, because, there are like tons of things that, has been changing ownership from time to time, and it's hard to track what we have and we don't. And also it's important to have a clear list of, all the things that we depend on, right? So it's our own supply chain stuff. So having that public, I'm a plus one on that sense, and I think most of the projects will be happy with that. I don't think many of the projects that we have are sensitive. Like for example, say like, I don't know, Node.js has like a HackerOne program, which is already publicly known, right? So the challenge is how we access to sensitive information, which most of the time is not going to be listed here, like secrets, tokens, stuff like that will not be listed here. So there's no any public exposure on that. So I think it's totally fine. It's a good exercise of transparency. And most of the providers probably will be happy to be listed somewhere and say like, yeah, this project survived thanks to, sponsorship of these companies and so on. So I think it's good. I don't see a lot of security concerns here.
Thanks, Ulysses. I appreciate the perspective on this. Um, could you put your Express hat on for a second and share your thoughts from that angle also?
Yeah, I think in the case of Express, it's even simple because we don't have like a lot of like sensitive infrastructure. Like, yeah, we have like a GitHub page, which is already known, and even if we have like a domain or whatever, and one day we have email aliases or something like that, that's going to be like all, right? So most of the JavaScript-based project that doesn't have infrastructure, all the services are even less concerning. Worst case, you are using, I don't know, Vercel for deploying your website or something like that, which people already will know that. So it's not super challenging. And yeah, I don't think it's going to be tricky. Maybe Electron might be more tricky because they have like a lot of infrastructure and other things very similar to Node.js, that case. But yeah, for other things, I'm thinking also about Lodash, for example, or, a project like that. I think it's going to be like a super challenging situation.
Awesome. Appreciate it, dude. Chris.
Yeah, so this is, of course, going to be the level of risk you're taking on making things public is going to be directly proportional to the amount of infrastructure that project runs, right? The amount of services that they use. Um, and while I agree with these comments that there's not a huge risk, generally speaking, and again, it's hard to define that without using actual concrete examples of what kind of services and infrastructure. But I don't want to make malicious attackers' jobs any easier than it needs to be. Oh, hang on. I need to confirm that I'm not speaking Spanish right now.
I'm happy to report that you are not.
Oh, I don't know. So what was I saying? Yeah, I think there's a middle ground. And I think, projects can decide to do what they want. I don't think that like many things, I don't think the foundation benefits from prescribing an exact thing for projects to do, but giving them options for things to do and suggestions. I think that having things in a repo is good. I much prefer that to a Google Doc. A Google Doc can be wiped out. The history is not, there is revision history, but it often is not like correct. Like I've tried to see revisions and I can't see the granularity. So like multiple revisions will get like squashed into one, and that has been very unhelpful in the past. And the fact that anybody can change anything, having in Git allows you to have proper and accurate revision control and permissions and all that sort of thing. I would generally prefer that these sorts of things be in a private repository. The level of privacy can be relatively open. Ulysses mentioned this is good for new contributors or getting, people can see what's going on that are contributing to the project. I mean, you can have a private repo and still be pretty open to new collaborators, right? You can have a team of new collaborators that have access to this, but it's just, and malicious attackers are, yes, they're going to find a way to find the information one way or the other, looking at doing reverse DNS lookup, whatever they're doing, or becoming a new collaborator on a project. This is a thing that they can, of course, do as well, but just making it a little less, a little more difficult for projects where there might have things that are sensitive. But like a completely public repo is not necessarily out of the question. A project has to look at what the content of the thing is and to decide, what is the risk of leaking this stuff. And the other thing is that, these are not irreversible decisions, right? You could start out with a public repo and go, oh, hang on a minute, we might not want to have this floating out there. Or vice versa. Oh, we started with a private repo, but really this isn't, this is very, very low risk that we would expose this information to the entire world. But I think that at the end of the day, some solution that allows for that revision control, I think, is important.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else before I follow up and maybe summarize, maybe offer an idea for folks to comment on? Okay. Well, so it sounds like the biggest hang up for folks doing this will be it sounds like there's the balance between it being in a public repo and the amount of information that is kept in it. And so if I think based upon kind of what I heard from Ben, I'm not sure if the level of detail that he's looking for is really all that private. On the other hand, on that said, if a project goes and produces this document for themselves that goes beyond what Ben and the foundation are hoping to have, then that document may need to be private. So to have some, I guess there's a question here of how important is consistency here? Like, does this file need to look exactly the same every time? And does it need to be the exact same spot? Or can we give projects a little bit of freedom on this, on what the doc looks like and where it is, so that to enable maybe better adoption, and to by having the projects not get hung up maybe on some of these little details around how public it is or how much information is out there.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, right? Is like, should this be in a format that we prescribe? And the reason for that would be if we're going to use it for, um, if they need to be machine readable, right? Like if we want to do anything fancy like that. I don't know if we want to go there, only because like we don't have any specific plans to do that, and it's not like the number of projects we have is so many that we would need to do that. So maybe we can start simply. So I think talking through this and speaking as I'm thinking, I think we probably want to give maybe some general guidance, but like the project can decide the format that they want to have it in. They may have specific uses for it, right? That we don't know, and maybe the format would help them with um, whatever it is they need to do.
Cool. So then in that case, it sounds like maybe the next step, I'd like to hear folks' thoughts on this, is that we produce a document that has like a guidance doc that has some very high level asks from the foundation on what this document that projects maintain has in it, and that key folks in the foundation, like I presume Robin, Ben, I'm not sure if there's anyone else, would have access to that document if it was kept in a private place in GitHub. But otherwise, all they would have to do is just let us know where they were maintaining that, and then we can just keep that list easily available. And hopefully, if that list becomes out of date or something like that, then the document, if you go look in the project, then it's still not too painful to find this document. Like maybe we can at least standardize on a naming convention so it's easy to search for. How does that grab folks? Silence.
Sorry, I was taking notes. Makes sense to me.
Cool beans. Steve is a thumbs up. Ulysses is a thumbs up. Robin's a thumbs up. Jordan, are you a thumbs up? Sorry if that was a thumbs up.
Yep.
Oh, sweet. Awesome. Well, in that case, then this was not too bad. So, Ben, just to kind of summarize, the sorts of information that you were looking for in the issue itself, none of that stuff seems really all that wild. So, next up on this one then is to follow up with the issue in that issue, and I can summarize what we've discussed here in the next step and see how folks feel about it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sweet, awesome. This has been good and a relatively easy one. Cool beans. So next item in the time we have is talking about the issue that was discussed last week, which was the secure release guidelines. And I'd like to go back to that and kind of go back to folks and hear your all's perspectives on what on the meeting last week. And the reason I wanted to bring this up in terms of like what you all are thinking is because the document we had initially in like a meeting about its scope, and then I worked on a little bit, and then the scope kind of blew up again. So maybe we need to go back a little bit and hear folks out on exactly what you would like to see out of a secure releases guide. I know Jordan provided the most insight on this, and that's what the document is currently rotating around. But I think we need to do a little, I think at this point, I could use a little help from folks just to kind of see whether or not we can get alignment on a couple of potential topics in it. So for example, can we talk about what folks think about using the OpenSSF NPM best practices guide as a basis for the secure releases doc? I'd like to hear your all thoughts on that.
Uh, I- the OpenSSF NPM best practices guide is not particularly well written. I think that needs a complete overhaul. So I would hesitate to use that as a starting point.
Okay, that's cool. That's a good point. I guess maybe phrasing starting point another way is that being kind of the base document we're working from like a here's what we're going for and what the aim is of the document itself. But of course we can go beyond that scope. Robin?
Yeah, I think we just need a starting point and not let like perfect get in the way of good. We've created a lot of great content from Jordan and Rudd and Ulysses and everyone. And so I feel like it's been sort of sitting, hidden away and doesn't have a lot of visibility. So if we just organize it by how we created it and then start iterating from there, it sort of does force us to describe what that document is in 2 sentences, or that content, and fine tune it from there. But I do feel like we do need a starting point. And what I saw from OpenSSF, and Ben created a link based on our conversation last week. It's a good way just to start surfacing the content that's been created.
Oh, Chris?
So I'm walking back my comments. I was thinking of a different guide. The reviewing the OpenSSF NPM best practices guide now. Yeah, the section on I do think it needs revisiting. It has not been updated in quite some time. I would like to. I do think it would be good to shore up this guide. But yeah, the first part is the NPM best practices. The second part is on vulnerability disclosures, which is interesting. So I just wanted to walk back my comment on the quality of the guide.
Put a link where OpenSSF on the homepage, it's under best practices, but essentially it is just a list of everything that's been worked on in different categories. So, sort of like that handbook that Steve mentioned last week. Doesn't have to be like the novel, New York Times bestseller, but just a starting point.
Yeah, so I think the going back to the original, oh, go ahead, Chris.
I didn't intend to interrupt.
No, you probably have a more salient point than I do.
I think we had some good feedback last week when we talked about this from Steve and others. And that was, any guide that we're doing here is really going to be made up of several different aspects and topics. And I think you can pick one and do that well and hang your hat on that. And then we can pick the next one and go on, because I think it can be a little bit paralyzing sometimes to try and boil the ocean by trying to exhaustively figure out every topic that's going to go into it. So I think starting off with just best practices around publishing, for example, and flush that out and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I that's kind of I think actually, Chris, you and I are effectively saying the same thing, but you're saying it way better. And that is, I think starting out with the topics in the NPM best practices guide that are in there related to NPM, like not necessarily the other parts right now, but specifically NPM. There's room from everything I've heard and seen, there's room for us to improve upon that document and be able to, and in a way that would allow us to also help the OpenSSF2 at the same time. So for secure releases to start, can we just start on the basics of using NPM? And I think actually, honestly, Chris, focusing on how to publish on NPM sounds like a great place to start. If that sounds great with you all, because that kind of is the crux of a secure releases guide as I imagine it for uh, what we'd be talking about.
I sort of envision from our homepage of our website, just having a security tab, and then you would just drop down and you would find maybe the NPM best practices guide. You might find information on our CNA, anything else, but again, not limit it to maybe just best practices, but security all up.
Yeah, so the security page, Robin, actually we have that. I already have that like pretty much done. It's just waiting to launch with the CNA because the content with the CNA is so wrapped into it. Didn't want to do it twice, but yeah, once we have the CNA, we do have that security page with links to the resources we've produced and description and all that ready to go. And Chris, related to what you said, I think, yeah. So how do people feel about focusing on NPM, publishing on NPM to start? Steve shaking his head yes. Chris is the one who suggested it. Jordan, Ulysses, any thoughts? Jordan's got a thumb up. Ulysses is a thumbs up. That sounds great. So in the time we have left, I'd love to hear what you all think when you think about publishing on NPM. And we already have quite a few topics in the original doc, but I'd love to take a little bit to sort of flesh out what sort of topics come to mind when talking about publishing on NPM.
Certainly account permissions. And there is, as we went through both in this group and then I think in Express, we tried to figure out the complicated NPM permission schemes and the difference between like the people listed, like who can publish versus what appears in the NPM docs themselves, and how those roles work is quite confusing. So that'll be a challenge to sort of untangle that stuff. Another thing just off the top of my head that's missing from the OpenSSF guide is that there's no unpublishing. They just go straight to NPM publish. And it's really useful, especially if you're publishing a package for the first time or you haven't done this much before, to do a dry run publish to see what it's actually going to do, which files it's going to include, how big your bundle size is going to be, that you're not leaking anything into the publish that you did not intend.
Could you slow down a little bit? Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I got dry run, but keep going.
Yes, it is good to do the dry run publish to see what's going to happen, which files will be included, how big the bundle size will be. You're not shipping anything that you did not intend to. By default, especially if you have not specified the files property in your package JSON. It may likely ship more than you intend. It may be shipping, if your project does any kind of transpilation, you might not be shipping what you intended to distribute. So these are important things to not, at the same time, publishing to NPM is inexpensive, but you're sometimes limited. Like, what are the rules around unpublishing? That's another thing that this needs to include, right? Um, you can't
The
unpublish once certain things have happened.
So they're not super clear, but my
Awesome.
best guess right now is that if there's some threshold, some number of downloads, um, after which something cannot be unpublished. There's also a time period after which something cannot be unpublished. Yeah, 72 hours. Yeah, it might not. Okay, so it has changed and the docs have changed, and maybe they're actually correct now. Um, but yeah, according to the docs that you pasted in chat, it's 72 hours or another package being published that depends on it. What that means is once your package is depended on by something, you can't unpublish anything.
Yeah.
um,
Even if it's
which
your own stuff.
even if it's your own stuff, and even if it's like, you put out a 101 that's broken, you have to put out a 102. You can't just
Right.
unpublish the 101.
Right. So this is exactly why I brought this up when talking about the dry run, because it was like, well, you can unpublish, but like, yeah, you don't want to have to rev your version because you've made this mistake. So the dry run is important.
Mhm.
Um,
I see CI best practices under here, but it mentions like writing tests and tools to use. Should we limit the scope here to remove writing tests as something to write on and to include in the scope of this?
yeah, that's a really good point. And this is why I also kind of wanted to start, in a sense, like start backwards.
Yeah.
Because like the secure releases idea, right? The scope can be enormous. Like, and including in the if you look at NPM best practices guide, it also talks about like dependencies and picking your dependencies, and this of course a super important topic, but like that's a very um sort of in a sense like distant from publishing your package. So that's why I kind of like wanted to work backwards from, okay, the last thing you do is the publish. Now, what did you do just before that? And what are you doing just before that? And what are you doing just before that? And eventually you might get to, you know, how to select dependencies, which the OpenSSF has a good guide on, for example. But there's these
Well,
other aspects to consider that are much closer to the where the rubber meets the road in terms of publishing.
I guess what I would want if I were showing up and wanted to publish like showing up with nothing, I want to make and publish my first package. What do I do? I would want eventually to find an OpenJS guide that gives me all those steps, and that's probably going to be 10 or 20 different guides for each of the pieces. Um, but like obviously we're not going to get there right now. That would be an overwhelming task. But like the actual act of publishing is one guide, um, but we would want to in that guide we would want to say, be sure you've checked, written tests, and we'll do a guide on that in the future, and be sure you've secured your Git repo, and and set up CI, and we'll have guides on that in the future, and be sure you know what I mean, like kind of allude to the fact that there's other things to worry about, but not actually burden ourselves at the moment with that. um, we could point them to a guide if one exists that we like. We could also just give them the words that can let them Google to find stuff. And then once we've put that out there, then we can, review, and if we like that path, then we can pick one of those topics to write the next guide on. Does that general approach seem workable to folks? I'm going to take a silence as a yes.
Yeah,
Cool.
definitely. Um, I do wonder, like, where those optimizing for where to like hook in those leads into other things would go. But yes.
Sorry, I was coughing. Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. And I think that's easy to pepper throughout as we're writing it, just to leave those breadcrumbs for ourselves and for later. For later. All right, let's see. So yeah, I think honestly, just to start out, this is enough meat for me to be able to put something together for us to discuss and iterate on further. So I think, um, do you all have any other thoughts around kind of the initial publishing stage and stuff to do right before publishing that really comes to mind for you? This is a great list right now, frankly, but just want to make sure we don't miss anything obvious.
Make sure what you're publishing has been committed. You can accidentally publish pending changes.
Mm.
There can also be tricky things with regard to publishing and the version in package JSON, especially when you're publishing like libraries that you're doing an interdependent publish of multiple things. Like you're publishing libraries, but you're also publishing things that consume them. Um, and I'm sure Ulysses and Jordan have more experience in that particular problem than me. But you can get into this weird chicken and egg thing where you want to publish the next version that's not actually committed yet. That sort of thing.
Got it.
I do want to mention, I do like this idea of writing more atomic, smaller guides. I think that's an interesting approach, and probably will allow us to kind of get things out and get consensus quicker, right? With just with less stuff to review and a more focused topic. So I do like that approach. And if we can try that with the NPM publishing as being the first one of those, try that approach, I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I'm a fan of this as well. So I feel good about the way we're doing this, and this feels like we can work through things better. So yeah, I'm a fan of this. Cool. I don't have anything else beside this topic for today, and I was expecting this to take a little bit longer than it wound up taking, which is good. Um, so is there anything else, folks, and the topics we've already talked about that like we want to dig into at all, or I can just go off and start working on this? I want to make sure I just hear your all's feelings on um, what kind of points are important to cover in this area, so I'm not missing anything.
Um, I think we have to maybe try and be comfortable with missing some things, because I also think it's harder to.
Oh, sure.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying if people think of things, definitely bring them up. But I feel like this is one of those things where we'll be like, oh, and then this thing, because we didn't
Yeah,
remember right at first.
cool.
Maybe next meeting, you have a draft and you turn it into a working session where everyone just fleshes out the document together, makes edits in real time. Group, write, edit.
We can try something like that. But
It's like, seems to be how we finish things here. We start a lot of things, but to finish them.
yeah, I think let's see how the initial document comes out. This needs a little bit of what I put together needs a lot of changes to fit the structure, which is fine. So I can take what we've got here as a foundation to start from, and there's a lot of work in what we just talked about anyway. So yeah, this is super helpful, folks. I really appreciate it. I feel good about the approach. I'm glad we have consensus on what we're focusing on right now. So thank you very much.
Thanks,
In
everyone.
the 15 minutes we have left. Anything else? Or do we want to get 15 minutes left? 15 minutes back, excuse me.
I don't
For
know,
everybody's.
maybe Jordan can tell us why he hates the files property of package JSON.
Oh yeah, let's go for it.
I put it in chat. Yeah, basically that
Well-
like it's if you accidentally omit something, the worst case consequence, or the likely and the worst case is much safer with npm ignore than it is with files. The worst consequence of having an extra file published by omitting from npm ignore is like there's secrets in it, like I don't know, environment variables were dumped to a file and that gets published. I've actually done that and pushed it to GitHub before, but that's fine. It's credentials. You change them, right? And npm and GitHub are particularly very good at scanning for credentials, and for npm and GitHub and disabling them. And lots of other services have that plugged in. But if you omit something from the files field, then you're highly likely to break downstream consumers, and that is a very, very expensive and time-consuming prospect, and should always be the highest priority thing to avoid. So the only thing that's annoying about npm ignore is that it supersedes git ignore. So you have to duplicate git ignore in it and then make adjustments to that. So I used the npm ignore package. I use it in all my packages so I git ignore the npm ignore file, and I make a pre-pack script that generates an npm ignore file from a field in package JSON and git ignore together. So basically it gives me the ergonomics I think npm should have always had. And then you can npm pack dry run, and you get like normal, and you get a list of the files that are about to be published. And yeah, so that's my advice.
Cool beans. I capture that, and we'll dig into it more, and hopefully I can do the topic justice when I take my first chop at it. So thanks, Jordan.
I feel like the
Alrighty.
risk to the files that you mentioned can be mitigated with testing.
It can, certainly. But generally you always want to prefer something that fails safe. It's great that that you can put extra mitigations in for files, but you don't have to. If you and also to mitigate that, you'd actually have to do tests on an extracted tarball. Like you'd have to run npm pack, extract it inside a different project, and test it there. And that is not something that's easy to do, and it's something that virtually nobody does. I have a thing on my packages that tries to simulate that. Like it does a pack and then deletes the production files and then extracts the tarball and reruns the tests, and it does that on all my packages. But that is very much not something that anyone but me does. So yeah.
I'm sorry for laughing. I'm not laughing at you, Jordan. I'm laughing at
I know
Chris's
Chris's funny little comment. I got it.
I am not really joking. I feel like this is shaking my worldview, and I don't want to let go of my files property.
I mean, that's how people feel about the .js extension too. But the truth hurts sometimes.
All right, cool. Anything else, folks? Nope. All right. Well, thank you, folks. Have a great week. I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.